Out on the edge of Wyoming territory, where the wind carried more stories than mail and fences, stretched farther than memories, there lived a man named Harlan Lowe. He wasn't famous. He wasn't feared. He was just a rancher with a scar on his shoulder, a stovepipe that rattled when the fire got low, and a porch swing that hadn't moved in 7 winters, not since the woman he loved went into labor and never came back out. Some folks said he talked to ghosts. Others said he just liked his quiet. But one morning just after first frost, something changed. It wasn't a storm, not a bandit, not a telegram with bad news. It was a boy, no older than 9 barefoot ribs, showing eyes like riverstone, too tired to be afraid. He hadn't come to steal. He hadn't come to beg. He'd come to die if no one stopped it. Harlan found him curled beside the barn, fingers blue with cold, holding a feather in one hand and a stone in the other, like both were worth the same. And without asking who he belonged to or why he was there, Harlan did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the door, he made stew, he lit the fire, he stayed. And when the boy finally spoke 2 hours later, voice cracked and barely there, he didn't ask for food. He whispered, "You saw me." But what Harlan didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that by morning the boy's people would know too. And they'd come. Not with arrows, not with anger, but with something the rancher hadn't felt in years, a reckoning. Because kindness out here, it didn't go unnoticed, especially when it was the first anyone had shown in a very, very long time. Have you ever done something small that changed everything? Stay with us, because the man they called Forgotten was about to become the reason 250 warriors stood in silence at his door. And nothing, not his grief, not his guilt, not his quiet, would ever be the same again. Out where the sky forgot how to end, and the land whispered instead of spoke, there lived a man named Harlan Pike. Folks in town called him the Quiet Rancher. Not out of respect, just habit. He was the kind of man who said more by what he didn't say. And after his wife passed 2 winters ago, he said even less. He ran a modest spread at the edge of Wyoming territory. 100 acres of stubborn grass, 2 dozen cattle, and a barn that leaned like it was tired of standing. Harlan didn't have children, didn't have a dog, just a rocking chair that creaked with the wind and a porch that hadn't seen a visitor in nearly a year. Some thought he was mean. Others figured he'd gone soft in the head from grief. But the truth was simpler. Harlan had nothing left to give, and nobody left to give it to. That changed the morning he found the boy. It was just before dawn. The frost hadn't yet melted off the rails. Harlan went to check the water trough, and there he was, curled up beneath the eaves of the barn, barefoot, thin as a whisper, skin like copper earth. Eyes closed tight like even sleep didn't trust the world not to hurt him. Harlan didn't ask who he was, didn't ask why he was there. He just bent down, lifted the boy gently, and carried him inside. The stove was already lit. He wrapped the child in an old horse blanket, set out bread and a tin of beans, and said only 4 words, "You eat, then rest." The boy didn't speak, just nodded, ate slowly, and slept so long Harlan checked twice to see if he was still breathing. That night Harlan sat by the fire watching the boy sleep. No one had ever stayed in his home since Miriam died. The silence was different now, not lonelier, just full. He didn't know what tribe the boy was from, didn't know who had left him or why. All he knew was this: no child should be that hungry or that quiet. And something deep inside Harlan stirred something he thought had long since dried up. Not pity, not charity, but remembrance. He too had once been small, scared, and invisible, and now he wasn't sure what this boy needed. But he knew what he wouldn't let happen. He wouldn't let him disappear. Have you ever seen someone truly seen them before they said a single word? Sometimes the beginning of a story isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet kindness in a house that had forgotten how to hold warmth. The boy stayed. He didn't run when the snow came, didn't steal from the pantry, didn't cry out in sleep. He just stayed, quiet as always, moving like someone used to being ignored. When he finally spoke, it wasn't a word, it was a gesture. 3 days after Harlan had brought him in, the boy was out feeding the chickens. One hen pecked his hand. He didn't flinch. He just turned to Harlan, eyes steady, and held up the bloodied finger. "Needs salt," he said softly, "so it don't fester." Harlan blinked. then got the salt. They didn't talk much after that. But things shifted. The boy began collecting eggs before sunrise. Harlan started making breakfast for two. The boy didn't offer a name, and Harlan didn't ask. Names meant ownership, meant claim, meant history. And something about the boy's eyes, watchful wide and too old for his frame, said the past wasn't a place he wanted to revisit. So Harlan called him kid, and the boy didn't correct him. He learned quickly, fixed the hinge on the barn door without being asked, started chopping firewood even when the wind burned his cheeks raw. And though they rarely spoke more than 5 words at a time, a rhythm settled between them, quiet, mutual, almost sacred. Until the 4th morning. Harlan had gone out early to mend the fence at the north edge. When he returned, the boy was standing by the gate, not afraid, just still. Behind him, lining the horizon, stood men, dozens, 200 at least, painted faces, leather fringe, feathers braided through long black hair, warriors, not yelling, not armed for battle, just present, silent, watching. Harlan froze. He felt no threat, just wait. Then an elder stepped forward, his presence like thunder held back by will. His eyes landed on the boy, then on Harlan. "You took in my grandson," he said. His voice was calm, strong. The boy looked at the ground. "He was starving," Harlan replied. The elder nodded. "We know." Then he stepped closer, not with fury, not with fire, but with something deeper. Gratitude. "You fed him," the elder said. "I did. You didn't send him away." "No." The old man looked over his shoulder. Behind him, warriors stood straight, pride in their posture, silence in their respect. "We do not forget mercy," he said, "even from strangers." And then as Harlan blinked in disbelief, the warriors did something unexpected. They bowed. Not low, not dramatic, just enough. Enough to say, "We see you." And then the elder said something in a language Harlan didn't know, but the boy nodded. He stepped forward and said, "His name is Tahata. It means wind that returns." Then he added almost shyly, "He wants to stay." Harlan didn't answer right away. He looked at the boy, at Tot, and saw something new. Not a stray, not a burden, but a seed, something planted in quiet, now growing. "You're home," Harlan said. Just 3 words, but Toddy smiled, and in that smile, years of silence cracked. Have you ever found family not by blood but by choice? Sometimes we're not meant to save someone. Sometimes we're just meant to make space for them to belong. Spring on the Wyoming plains never arrived all at once. It came in hesitations, a day of thaw followed by a week of ice, a calf born too early, a rain that didn't stay long enough. It mirrored in many ways the way people healed. And Harlan was still healing. So was Todd. The boy spoke more now, but always softly, always carefully, as if each word had a weight he didn't want to misuse. He never raised his voice, never questioned orders, but neither did he call Harlan father or even sir. Respect wasn't the problem. Distance was. One morning while repairing a fence post, Harlan caught Tot staring at the ridge beyond the valley. "Thinking of leaving?" Harlan asked. The boy shrugged. "Sometimes the wind moves through me like it wants to go." Harlan didn't press. He just nodded. But that night he sat alone by the hearth, wondering if kindness was ever enough to hold someone in place. The town didn't help. Word had spread. A rancher living alone for years, now keeping a native boy under his roof. Some were curious. Most were cautious. And a few, like Burke Caldwell, the banker, were cruel. "He yours?" Burke asked one afternoon outside the feed store, voice dripping with something that wasn't just racism, but smallness. "He's staying with me," Harlan replied. Burke spat. "Must be nice. Free labor." Harlan didn't rise to it, just loaded his sack of grain and turned to leave. But that night he told Tahati, "Some folks don't understand what they haven't lived. Doesn't mean you owe them your silence." Tot looked down. "In my tribe, we're taught silence is strength. And in mine," Harlan said, "we're taught it's weakness. But I think maybe both are wrong or both are right." That night, neither of them slept well. Then came the raid. Not on Harlan's land, but the next valley over. A cattle drive gone wrong, a ranch burned, a man dead. The whispers were fast natives, revenge, scalp hunters. Sheriff Hunt rode out angry and half blind. And it didn't take long before his men arrived at Harlan's door. They didn't ask. They demanded. "Where's the boy?" Harlan stepped outside. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, just said he hasn't left the valley. The sheriff wasn't convinced. And that night, Tot sat by the window, eyes shining but dry. "They'll never see me as yours," he said. "Not really." Harlan lit the lamp, sat beside him, and said, "I didn't take you in so they would. I took you in because I saw you." Silence. Then the boy whispered, "I miss my mother." Harlan nodded. "I miss someone too." They didn't speak again that night, but something settled, not peace, but a shared grief, a bridge between two paths, and perhaps the beginning of something unspoken. Have you ever loved someone you couldn't protect? What do we do when the world outside tries to undo what we build in quiet? From the moment Harlan bends down to help a starving child, to the moment the entire town looks at him with wary eyes. What do you feel? Is it sadness for what's left unsaid, or a glimmer of hope as two strangers learn to accept each other? So what happens when Tate's past returns not as a memory, but as 250 warriors on horseback arriving at Harlan's barn? Can love stand when the world demands separation? Join us as we move forward, because sometimes love is tested not just by differences, but by loyalty to what's right. When Harlan stepped out onto the porch that morning, he didn't expect to find anything different. But the wind had changed, and at the end of the red dirt road, where the boundary between the farm and the unfenced land was a sight he would never forget. More than 200 native warriors. Upright on horseback, no aggression, no spears pointed, just a silent, steady presence. At the front of the column, an older man rode, his long gray hair tied back, his cloak hand-woven of linen and deerskin. Tate was coming out of the stables with a bucket of water, and the boy stopped. His eyes were filled with fear. "He's my father," Tot said softly, not taking his eyes off the man. "They don't know I'm alive." Harlan nodded, saying nothing. The older man dismounted and walked slowly toward them, his every gesture discreet but weighty, as if each footfall held history. The boy Tate stepped forward. No one spoke for a few minutes, only the wind rustling through the old oaks. Finally, the native looked straight at Harlan, then bowed slightly. "You don't know who we are," he said in slow English, "but you saved my flesh and blood. That means your family." Harlan was not used to grand words. He merely lifted the brim of his hat. "The boy needs men," he replied, "and I have room." "Not everyone does," the other replied. One of the warriors behind him held up a large piece of cloth, a handmade shirt embroidered with the clan's crest. "We don't carry gold," the old man said, "but we carry a promise. If anyone touches you, they will have to go through the first 200 people. Not a threat, a promise." And Harlan, who had lived for years in solitude, suddenly felt as if he were standing not only on his own land, but in the heart of a community that was not his own, but that was now open. Do you believe that a small act like sharing a meal with a child could change the fate of an entire farm? Harlan had never sought recognition. But now he stood before something he had never dreamed of, his entire life being accepted. Not as a white man, but as someone who had loved the right way. So, what happens when the very town he lives in turns its back on that decision? News travels fast in Western towns. It doesn't need a telegraph. Just 2 days after hundreds of warriors set up camp outside Harlan's ranch, the stares began to linger longer than usual. And when he went into town for salt and linen, every conversation seemed to stop mid-sentence. "You took in one of their bastards," a man at the post office said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Maybe Harlan's gotten too old to feel fear." Another sneered. Harlan didn't reply. He bought salt, bought rope, and returned to the ranch where Tat was weaving a basket on the porch, his small hands more skillful than any boy Harlan had ever seen. But the whispers didn't stay in town. One morning the town preacher came. Bible in hand, he knocked on the wooden door. "I come in goodwill," he said, "but keeping that child, it's making people uneasy. Some say you're disturbing the peace." Harlan raised an eyebrow. "What peace?" he asked calmly. "The peace that lets children starve on the roadside while we look away." The preacher flushed. "I'm not here to argue. It's just, you might be putting others in danger. They say that tribe will claim land. Take everything." "By quietly pitching tents and gifting me a shirt," Harlan replied, eyes never leaving the boiling fire. "If that's conquest, I wish the world had more conquerors like them." The preacher didn't respond. He nodded somberly and left the kitchen left heavy in his wake, where peace had always resided. That night, Todd had nightmares again. He woke up to the wind howling through the roof, sweat on his brow. Harlan sat beside him, handing him a cup of water. "What did you dream about?" he asked. "They came," Todd trembled. "They burned the camp. Took you away. Said you were a traitor." Harlan looked into the boy's eyes. "Listen," he said, voice low and steady, like a heart that had weathered too much loss. "People fear what they don't understand. But that doesn't make you wrong, and it doesn't make me wrong for standing by you." The next day, someone threw a rock over the fence. It didn't hit anyone, but it was enough for Harlan to know the silence was running out of time. Harlan only did what he believed was right, taking in an abandoned child, raising him with hard work and quiet resolve. But can kindness truly stand against fear and prejudice that's been passed down for generations? As the very town he once called home begins to turn its back on him, the question is no longer, can Harlan endure? It is, can the two of them find life in a place where they had only ever known silence? They came just before sunset. 5 riders on horseback, dust-worn, silent and sharp-eyed, pulling up outside Harlan's barn as if they had a right to the land beneath their boots. They didn't knock, didn't greet, didn't look at the child sitting by the fence tying a length of twine into a bird's shape. "Evenin', Mister Reese," said the tallest one. "We hear you've taken in a boy. An Injun boy." Harlan stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. His jaw was tight, but his voice was steady. "I've taken in a child. He was starving. Now he's not." The rider's mouth twisted. "This ain't about food, it's about trouble. You feed one, you invite the whole tribe. It's how it starts." "No," Harlan replied. "It started with someone letting him starve." A second man spat into the dirt. "You don't know what they'll bring. Maybe not today. But one morning you'll wake up with arrows in your barn and blood on your porch." From behind the barn came the sound of a small voice. Mister Reese Tat stepped into view, his eyes cautious but unafraid. The riders looked at him like he was something dangerous, not a boy, but a warning. And then the sound of thunder, not from the sky, but from the hills. Hoofbeats, dozens, scores. From the ridgeline they came, mounted warriors in silent formation, faces painted not for war but for mourning. No weapons drawn, no shouts, just presence. 200, maybe more. Standing vigil behind one child, one elder rode forward. Long braids, eagle feathers, eyes like time. He looked at Harlan, then at the boy, and he said in a language the others didn't understand, "You did not take him. You welcomed him. That is a gift we don't forget." Then in English, "This boy is of our people, but today he is also yours. We came not to threaten but to witness. You are not alone." The men on horseback looked pale, small. One turned to leave. The others followed, shame creeping up their necks. Harlan didn't gloat, didn't say a word. He just placed a hand on Tot's shoulder and led him inside. That night they ate stew beside the fire. No fear in their bellies, only warmth. After the dishes were cleaned, Tot looked up and asked softly, "Will they come back?" Harlan stirred the fire. "Maybe, but next time you won't be alone." And for the first time, Tahat smiled without hesitation. He was once a child the world wanted to erase. Now he was a bridge between two worlds, standing not in the shadows but in the open. But even with peace for the moment, can trust truly take root in a land so scarred by division? And what happens when love, real love, begins to bloom in the most unexpected corner of the prairie? Spring came late that year, soft and slow, like an apology whispered after a long silence. The snow melted gently off the hills, and in its place wildflowers took root where boots once trampled. The barn door stopped creaking, thanks to Tati's careful oiling, and the porch swing moved again, swaying with the breeze and the weight of stories not yet told. They had fallen into rhythm, Harlan and the boy. No papers bound them, no court declared them family. But every morning Tat ran out to feed the chickens without being told. And every evening Harlan found the boy's shoes lined neatly by the door next to his own. And then one day, while planting beans beside the kitchen window, Tat looked up and asked quietly, "Do I live here now?" Harlan didn't answer right away. He stood brushing dirt from his palms and looked toward the horizon, wide and gold with light. Then he turned, knelt beside the boy, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't just live here," he said. "You belong here." The boy nodded slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of hide. On it, painted with coal and berry juice, was a picture: a tall man and a small boy. Two stick figures, side by side. "I made it for you," he said. Harlan took it like it was the finest map ever drawn. And in that moment, without fanfare, without ceremony, something shifted. Not just between them, but within them. The ache that had once hollowed Harlan out, the grief, the guilt, the silence had been filled not with noise but with presence, with a child's trust, with quiet mornings and 2 cups at the table instead of one. That summer, the boy began calling him Pa, not out of habit, not out of obligation, but because that's what healing had made space for. So maybe miracles don't always arrive in lightning. Maybe they come hungry, dirty, silent, and maybe love doesn't always roar in. Maybe it walks barefoot, cautious, with eyes full of old hurt, and waits to be welcomed. Have you ever found something to live for, just by choosing to stay? Sometimes the most beautiful stories don't end with applause, they end with quiet. A quiet porch where 2 chairs are finally filled. A quiet supper where no one eats alone. A quiet home where once there was only the sound of the wind. Edith had been told she was too much, too large, too plain, too late to be loved. But Silas the widower, who knew the weight of absence, didn't see her through the eyes of a world obsessed with appearances. He saw her heart, her steadiness, the way she filled a room with care, not noise, and slowly, gently, she began to believe him. They didn't fall in love all at once. There were no grand gestures, just 1,000 little kindnesses, 1 spoonful of stew, 1 patched shirt one evening of shared silence at a time. In the end, Edith didn't need to change herself. She just needed someone who wouldn't ask her to. And maybe that's something we all need: not to be rescued, not to be remade, but to be seen. If this story spoke to you, would you let us know? Leave a comment. Have you ever felt invisible until someone finally saw your worth? Would you like more stories like Edith's? And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. We share stories that don't shout but whisper, for hearts that have waited a long time to feel heard.